veterinarian, and a policy staff officer with the Office of Policy Program Development with the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service. Today, I'm going to speak about our current requirements for food safety at slaughter. The Food Safety and Inspection Service is responsible to ensure that meat, poultry, and egg products are safe and that they are properly labeled and packaged. FSIS employs approximately 8,700 employees. 7,800 of those are on the frontline workforce, and we oversee regulatory requirements and approximately 6,500 federally regulated establishments. The acts that govern FSIS and give us our statutory authority are the Federal Meat Inspection Act, the Agricultural Marketing Act, the Poultry Products Inspection Act, the Egg Products Inspection Act, and the Humane Methods of Livestock Slaughter Act. FSIS ensures food safety at slaughter through robust antemortem and postmortem inspection procedures, offline verifications to determine whether establishments implement effective sanitation and food safety systems, as well as verification sampling programs. FSIS inspection begins with antemortem inspection, and FSIS examines livestock and poultry before slaughter to determine whether they show signs of disease or abnormalities and are fit to slaughter for human food. Establishments identify and present animals for antemortem inspection on the day of slaughter. FSIS examines livestock at rest and in motion, and FSIS inspectors examine poultry in cages or coops. The result of this antemortem inspection, we make three possible dispositions. Animals can either be passed for slaughter and normal postmortem inspection procedures. They can be passed for slaughter but handled as suspect animals, or they can be condemned. Only animals that pass antemortem inspection are allowed to enter the slaughter facility. The purpose of postmortem inspection is to protect public health by ensuring that the carcasses and associated parts are wholesome and not adulterated. FS online inspectors examine livestock and poultry carcasses and associated visceral organs after slaughter to determine whether they show signs of disease or abnormalities and are fit for human food. Veterinarians are available to determine proper disposition of carcasses when inspectors detect abnormal conditions that require a thorough examination. Veterinarians can also submit tissues for laboratory analysis to obtain additional information when necessary to make a proper disposition. In addition to our antemortem and postmortem inspection procedures on each animal, FSIS also performs offline food safety verifications. And we verify food safety at slaughter through hazard analysis and critical control point, also known as HACCP, and sanitation regulatory requirements. FSIS enforces HACCP regulations to verify that establishments adequately address food safety hazards through HACCP systems. These HACCP systems are required to address all potential food safety hazards, including chemical, physical, and biological food safety hazards. Established HACCP systems are specific to the processes and consider food safety hazards that may be introduced at any point in the process, such as at live animal receiving, evisceration, or any type of preparation. Establishments are required to demonstrate through these HACCP systems that their products are safe for consumption and unadulterated. This places food safety responsibility on the establishment. Our HACCP regulations are based on these 7 HACCP principles, and I will briefly go through each one. The first HACCP principle is to conduct a hazard analysis. The beginning of addressing food safety hazards begins with a good hazard analysis. And this hazard analysis is required to identify any food safety hazards that are reasonably likely to occur at each processing step. And as I mentioned before, this includes biological, chemical, and physical hazards. And the hazard analysis, the establishment is required to conduct a hazard analysis, and they are to include any food safety hazards that can occur before, during, and after entry into the establishment, such as when livestock come into the establishment. The hazard analysis is to identify the preventative measures that are used to control the hazards. And the hazard analysis is unique to each establishment based on the process and products. Hazards considered inherent in the slaughter process include those introduced through live animals. And examples of these are pathogens, which are a type of biological hazard, or veterinary drug residues are two examples that we commonly deal with in the slaughter process. The second hazard principle is to develop critical control points, also known as CCPs. A CCP is a point, step, or procedure in the process where control is applied to prevent, eliminate, or reduce a food safety hazard to acceptable levels. These are to include critical limits that must be met. Examples of CCPs at slaughter include the chemical concentration and application of an antimicrobial solution and zero amounts of fecal, ingesta, or milk contamination on carcasses. The CCP location is not required to be at the point where the hazard may be introduced into the process. It could be later in the process than at the point the hazard may be introduced. Establishments are required to maintain documents to support the development of the CCPs. The third hazard principle is to establish critical limits. Critical limits are the parameters that indicate whether the process is in or out of control at the critical control point. The critical limit is a maximum or minimum value or a range of values, but they must be measurable values and they must be quantifiable. And the critical limit parameters must be based on scientific or technical support. The fourth hazard principle is to establish monitoring procedures. Critical control point monitoring is a planned sequence of observations or measurements to assess whether a critical control point is under control and to produce an accurate record for future reference. Establishments develop the critical control point monitoring procedures. They should be designed to determine when the process is trending towards loss of control and when deviations from a critical limit occur, so that establishments can adjust the process or initiate corrective actions when a deviation occurs. Continuous monitoring and recording equipment is ideal. However, establishments can use intermittent monitoring, and when they do, the frequency should be adequate to determine that the critical control point is under control. Establishments are required to support their monitoring procedure and frequency. The fifth hazard principle is to establish corrective actions. And this means that when a deviation from a critical limit occurs, the establishment is required to take corrective actions to prevent unsafe or adulterated food from reaching consumers. The specific corrective actions depend on the specific process and the type of product. Established hazard plans are required to list these corrective actions, and these corrective actions must identify the cause of the deviation, ensure that the critical control point is under control after the establishment implements corrective actions, and include measures to prevent the deviation, and also to ensure that no product that is injurious to health or otherwise adulterated as a result of the deviation enters commerce. The sixth HACCP principle is to establish record keeping. The HACCP system must have an effective record keeping system. Records are evidence that documents the operation of the HACCP system. Establishments are required to document daily operational records, such as all monitoring records, which include actual times, temperatures, or other quantifiable values, any corrective actions taken in response to a critical limit deviation, verification procedures and results, and the product name, identity, or slaughter production lot of the products that were represented by those records. Establishments are also required to document their hazard analyses, their HACCP plans, and any programs that they use to support their hazard analysis decisions. The seventh HACCP principle is to establish verification procedures. Establishments' HACCP plans are required to include ongoing verification procedures to determine whether the HACCP system functions properly. These procedures determine whether critical control points are accurately monitored, process monitoring equipment is calibrated, corrective actions are implemented, and records are accurately completed. The establishments are also required to validate their HACCP systems. And what that means is that the HACCP systems must be based on a scientific or technical basis sufficient to control the hazards. And validation consists of two parts. The first part is the scientific or technical information to show that the HACCP plan, including any programs to support the hazard analysis decisions, effectively control the hazards. And an example of the scientific information is scientific journal articles from refereed journals are good sources of scientific or technical information. The second part is initial validation data that shows an establishment effectively implements its HACCP system. What that basically means is that the HACCP system functions as intended and that the establishment can carry out their HACCP system in plant under their specific conditions. One of the important parts of the HACCP regulations is unforeseen hazards and HACCP reassessment. And what this means is that establishments are required to reassess their HACCP plans at least annually, and whenever any change occurs that could affect the hazard analysis or alter the HACCP plan. And such changes, could include changes in source products or animals or slaughter methods or systems. So when it comes to slaughter, if there's a change in the incoming live animals that could affect the establishment's HACCP system, the hazard analysis, then they are required to reassess their HACCP plan to see if any changes are needed to deal with those changes. Establishments are also required to reassess their HACCP plans when an unforeseen hazard arises. So if there isn't a hazard that's been addressed in their HACCP plan, either whether that's identified by the establishment or FSIS, the establishment is required to take corrective actions. And these corrective actions must include to perform a review to determine the acceptability of the affected product for distribution and to take action when necessary to the affected product to ensure that no product that is injurious to health or otherwise adulterated enters commerce. They are to segregate and hold affected product until the above review and actions are complete and reassess the HACCP plan to determine whether to develop a critical control point for the unforeseen hazard. Another important part of food safety at slaughter, of course, is sanitary dressing. And establishments are required to slaughter and process livestock and poultry in a manner that prevents carcass contamination, usually from hide, skin, or feathers, gastrointestinal tract contents, hooves or paws, employees, equipment, facilities, and also any aerosols that could be spreading contamination. Preventing carcass contamination is essential to ensure that subsequent antimicrobial intervention and other methods to control pathogens are effective. The other way that FSIS ensures food safety at slaughter is to enforcing sanitation regulations. Establishments are required to operate and maintain their facilities in a sanitary manner sufficient to prevent unsanitary conditions and product adulteration. Establishments are required to develop, implement, monitor, and maintain sanitation standard operational procedures, also known as sanitation SOPs. These sanitation SOPs must include procedures conducted before and during operations. Establishments are required to monitor the implementation of these procedures. Establishments are required to take corrective actions when the implementation of these procedures fails to prevent product contamination. The corrective actions must include appropriate disposition of affected products, restoring sanitary conditions, and preventing recurrence of product contamination. So just to summarize what I've gone over is that in addition to thorough antemortem and postmortem inspection procedures, FSIS verifies compliance through HACCP and sanitation verification tasks, hazard analysis verification tasks, and sampling tasks. During the HACCP and sanitation verification tasks, our inspectors verify the implementation of HACCP plans, any programs used to support the hazard analysis decisions and sanitation compliance. These tasks include both review and observation and record-keeping components. During the hazard analysis verification tasks, our inspectors verify the development of an establishment's HACCP system, including the hazard analysis, and whether the establishment adequately supports its hazard analysis decisions and critical control points. And we also collect samples to verify the effectiveness of an establishment's HACCP system. So this concludes my presentation, and I will be available during the meeting if anyone has any questions. Thank you.